At some point in your whiskey journey, you will probably find that independent bottlings are one of the best ways to get to know a given distillery. And coming off the back of the Craigellachie 23-year-old, which I felt was an absolutely fantastic whiskey, an official bottling, to clarify, I kind of felt like that wasn't kind of what my brain thought of as being Craigellachie. That 23 years of age in the casks really kind of sanded down what can be a somewhat challenging and aggressive style of whiskey. So I wanted to follow that up with an example of Craigellachie that I thought was just putting what Craigellachie is, their distillery character, turning that volume up to 11. So let's take a look at this K&L Exclusive Thompson Bros bottling of 13-year-old Craigellachie, aged in oak casks, 53.8%. And let's just talk a little bit about what independent bottlings can offer and where you may find your best value. Welcome everyone to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian, and we are indeed going to be drinking and scoring and just kind of discussing in general this bottle of 13-year-old Craigellachie from the Thompson Brothers. As I mentioned, this is exclusive to K&L Wines here in California. But anyways, this bottle is something that I kind of wanted to highlight, particularly coming off the back of the Craigellachie 23-year-old official bottling that I reviewed last week. If you want to check that video out, please do so. I think I mentioned this bottle briefly in that video, but that Craigellachie 23 was absolutely delicious, but maybe not something that my brain kind of registered as being Craigellachie given the experiences that I've had with the distillery up to this point. You see, this is like if you took Craigellachie and their distillery character and really just stripped it bare. Very little cask influence coming through on this particular bottle, and those worm tubs and that kind of sulfury quality that the 23-year-old bottling talked about on the back. And I said, I don't get anything I would even remotely consider sulfury on the 23-year-old. You can definitely find that quality here, although it doesn't necessarily show up that way for me. I know what they're talking about. And that's the great thing about independent bottlings. One of the great things about IBs, as I'll try to remember to call them instead of saying independent bottlings 25 times. But when it comes to IBs, you can either get this style of bottling where they are going to show you exactly what that distillery produces. Like when that clear spirit comes off the still and they put it into a cask that is just not going to mess with it much. It will add a little bit of nuance, but mostly you are just going to let time kind of take its toll, sand the edges off of that distillery. And at 13 years old, this is still at least relatively young. As I mentioned, the Craigellachie 13-year-old is kind of their introductory to their brand. If you were going to look at their official bottlings, there's actually two. There's the standard one, and then there's the Boss Armagnac one. But this is taking that same age statement, bumping up the ABV to 53.9%. Slight correction from, I think, the intro of the video there, but and even less cask influence. Like I said, I think this is probably some refill casks, or if not, the casks were just very, they did a very light job in terms of adding any additional flavor, which can be great if that's your thing. It's kind of my thing, certainly at times, or it could be something that just completely turns you off. And we'll kind of talk about the second style of independent bottling, and that's where there's very heavy cask influence or unique cask influence, different types of wines or fortified wines, red wines, whatever, right? We see all sorts of interesting casks come out that would only be available maybe through some special releases in the official bottling line. And those can be fun and interesting too, but I'm definitely kind of at the stage where I prefer this style of IB just because in my mind, I'm still getting to know the individual distilleries and just understanding like what type of whiskey, like what's the baseline for them. And that way I can understand the more heavily cask influenced bottles because I know what part of that experience I can attribute to the spirit and what may be coming from the cask. Another great thing about independent bottlings, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is when it comes to value, even though I think a lot of people in their minds still feel like independent bottlings were a better deal in the past, where you could really get fantastic prices for very good whiskey compared to the official releases, I still think they are probably the better value overall. Like this was $65 plus tax at cask strength 13 years old, and that's not much more expensive than the 13-year-old non-cask strength version. And you're getting a bigger, fuller experience. Obviously, you get to geek out. There's a little bit more room to play if you want to play with, if you want to add water. And just generally, I think the independent bottlings are going to serve people better the further they get into their overall whiskey journey. With the downside is that it's a little bit of a roll of the dice, because it's unlikely that you're going to know for sure whether that release is good or not. You can go online and try to find out what some other people are saying, but if there's only 200 or 250 bottles of a particular release, because that's all that was in that single barrel, you might have to make that decision quickly if it's going to get snapped up, if it's from a bottler like the Thompson Brothers, where those bottles are unlikely to sit around while you wait for a review to get posted. So you kind of got to be able to trust bottlers, which I think the Thompson Brothers have garnered a reputation, for not really releasing anything that's not good, that's not going to be good. They won this year's Oswa Award for Best Independent Bottler, and I think it's well deserved, even though I haven't gotten to try a lot of them. I'm looking forward to trying some more as they become available here in the States. I have picked up a few, and hopefully we'll get reviews of those out at some point, of varying ages and distilleries, and including an interesting blend that just arrived here yesterday. But without further ado, why don't we get into the nosing and tasting notes and give this thing a score, generally speaking, because this one is fun, but maybe fun for different reasons than some of the other bottles that we've reviewed on this channel this past year. So let's get to it. All right, on the nose. So you are hit with what I think they just have described as the sulfury quality. It's the worm tub note that can be different for different distilleries, and can be explained by different people or described by different people in very different ways. I don't smell it as being sulfur, although this one might be leaning that way. This one to me is it's spirit forward, right? You're not going to be getting, whether it's bourbon cask, wine cask, very little of that. You are going to be getting that multi-grain whiskey, where if you've drank like really young whiskey, it's going to be much more prominent. It's going to be a little bit rougher around the edges, a little more gravelly. It's just going to, even on the palate, it'll be a little bit sharper, at least for me. That's why I tend to not like the super young releases. But this kind of spirit forward quality, like you can tell that 13 years of time in the cask has softened it a bit, sanded the edges, however you want to put it. There's a freshness overall alongside that kind of heavy grain. There's a little bit of fresh citrus. There's some dampness to it. And instead of that sulfury quality, I think you get in the grain, and there's almost like there's a cheesy quality, but not a cheesiness like is described or that I experience in some Springbanks and things like that. This is like a very light, like aged Parmesan or something. It's just kind of in the background. I think that kind of more raw spirit is definitely the main thing, but just underneath you're getting some like aged Parmesan Reggiano or something like that. Yeah. But overall, not a super complex whiskey. There's some challenging notes depending on what kind of whiskey you like. I was thinking earlier, because I've been trying to put together like a video about bourbon and scotch, and just some of my opinions on some of the dialogue just around that whole thing, and just some opinions I've had, and it just hasn't clicked yet. But one of the things that I was thinking about is, this is definitely, I think, a whiskey where if you're a bourbon drinker or you have a bourbon drinker friend that you want to get into scotch, this is definitely not what you want to give them. This is probably everything that they in their minds think they don't like about scotch. Just the lack of sweetness on the nose. There's a little bit, maybe some lemon candy in the back, but otherwise this is spirity, which spirity bourbons are probably not what people are looking for. People like bourbon because of the cask, and then each individual distillery has a character that they kind of add to the experience. But this is, I would not use this one to lure your bourbon drinking friends over to the side of scotch. But let's taste it and see what we get, see how much it translates from the nose. Cheers. Up front, it's fresh, bright, a little bit of lemon, more of a very light honey sweetness. You know, it's kind of clean, and it's kind of setting you up. Actually, compared to the 23-year-old, that's actually somewhat similar to the experience. I would say obviously they're a little bit more vanilla, but there was a really delicious kind of silky, like honey flavor and texture from the 23, if I'm remembering properly. This is something actually somewhat similar. It's not quite as dense, it's not quite as kind of silky and oily, but it's pretty clean, fresh, and just a little bit of like lemony sweetness. The lemon kind of intensifies once you swallow it, and then comes in the ABV, which isn't bad. Like 54% thereabouts is really kind of where I probably enjoy Scotch whiskey the most, and it does still leave a little bit of room for water if you wanted to kind of play around with it. But once it gets up over 55, it tends to start leaning more towards, I'm probably going to enjoy this with at least a couple drops of water or something like that. But this is pretty much perfect. It's got a little bit of bite, kind of perks you up a little bit, especially that first sip, but no burn, nothing like that. But you're getting that heaviness, that weight that I've talked about in previous videos, where there's a graininess, but it's not harsh, it's not gravelly, it's not biting like the super young stuff is. This is got that 13 years has done some work, and it's much appreciated by me for sure. But you got that, you get a little bit of kind of that dryness from the alcohol. It doesn't taste like ethanol or anything like that, but the effects are still there, I suppose, from a texture standpoint. Let's do another sip and see what else I can find. Cheers. There's a pretty big, like, bourbon cask maltiness that you would expect from this ABV and something that's probably this color. It's pretty pleasant though. It doesn't quite get into the sweet nougatiness. It's more, again, a little bit more dry, a bit more kind of raw malted barley sugar sort of thing. It doesn't quite get to that artificially sweetened kind of nougat that you find in a candy bar, and that you do find on, or at least I find on Scotch sometimes. It's got a nice finish, almost kind of leaves a bit of a freshness in your mouth. Almost, it's not quite minty, but it kind of feels like maybe like the sensation after like mouthwash or something like that. It kind of has that kind of prickly, not quite minty freshness. Anyways, I don't know how else to describe it. I'm sure there's probably a word for it, but It's delicious. Like if you like the 13, the official bottling, this is just gonna amping that up even more. And there have been times when this wouldn't have been a whiskey that I have liked, and it can be a mood thing. I've kind of gone back and forth over the years as to how much I like this kind of refill cask sort of experience, particularly from something that's kind of sub 15 years old, and how much of that spirit quality I really like. I think I'm coming back into that kind of raw, more powerful youth. This is fantastic. It's delicious. It's probably still not something I want to drink all the time, but this is probably as close as I can get to going on a distillery tour at Craigellachie and kind of tasting the spirit off the still, but probably better. Well, definitely better, I'm sure. Sometimes you hear about these worm tub distilleries in particular where the raw spirit can actually be somewhat off-putting, just because of the big, heavy flavors from those condensers. So as far as a score, I don't think this one would like elevate to like an 8 out of 10. I think the experience is kind of like gets me excited to where I almost kind of want to go there. But I think just generally speaking, you kind of got to know that you really like Craigellachie, or you really like the heavier worm tub style of whiskey. Like if you were just to buy something like this, not knowing what it was, you might be surprised. That first sip might elicit a bit of a face, but for me, this is great. I think 7 out of 10, very good, is definitely where this thing is going to land. Although it's more so just going to be limited by what type of scotch you like. Again, bourbon drinker, probably want to stay away from this. Not a whole lot of sweetness to be found, kind of dry. And another great example of the Thompson Brothers offering a bottle that is very representative of the distillery itself, and something that probably Craigellachie or Dewar's, which is I believe who owns them, probably would not put out a release like this that is just kind of stripping all of that cask influence, bourbon or otherwise, bare, and just giving you kind of a raw example of this distillery. And by the time I'm done with this bottle, I'm gonna have a really great picture of what Craigellachie is, what the baseline is, and I think I'll be able to enjoy future offerings from whether official bottlings or independents. I'll be able to enjoy them a little bit more because I'll have something that's pretty distinct in my brain about what is coming from the distillery and what may be cast. In terms of value, $65, as I mentioned, plus tax. Fantastic value. Anytime you can get great cast strength independent bottlings like these for under $70. Yeah, those are buys all day. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of them these days. It feels like maybe more in the UK if you're there. I know you guys are getting a bit of a wave, particularly from Signatory in terms of quality. Oftentimes heavily cask influence, but decent age statement, 57.1% ABV whiskeys from their 100 proof collection, 100 UK proof for those of you in the States. So maybe there's a little bit of a turning tide. Thompson Brothers are doing a great job offering things at a fair price, and looks like Signatory is really kind of maybe taking it to some of the other bottlers that are just kind of trying to get as much as they can for every cask that they bottle. But they're a big bottler, so they can maybe afford to do that a little bit easier than some of the smaller ones. But thank you once again for tuning in to Whiskey Uncorked. I really do appreciate it. The holidays coming up, it's going to be busy. We'll be going back to Wisconsin once again this year. I don't know if I'm going to get to record. Hopefully, I'd like to. Maybe we could record an episode or something like that. We did like 3 different ones last year when the channel was just getting started. we'll see what happens, but hopefully shouldn't be any interruptions in content. We'll see what happens. I've got some ideas, and it's just really a matter of whether life and my brain let me record and edit all of the things that I've got kind of queued up. So please leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff below. We will definitely be back next week with at least one more whiskey review. Cheers.